What do a sunken ocean liner, an avant-garde Parisian party, and a live crocodile have in common? They all added their own, sometimes quite shocking chapters to the history of the great Maison Cartier. Today, we are going to discover how a magnificent tiara survived one of the most tragic maritime disasters of the 20th century. We will see how a formal, historic heirloom was transformed into a daring choker, and we will find out why a famous diva brought an actual live predator into an exquisite Parisian boutique. I promise you, after hearing these stories, you will look at high jewelry in a completely different light. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. First of all, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who supported my previous video. It was such a joy reading through all your comments, and since so many of you asked for a part 2, I was absolutely thrilled to put this together for you. So, sit back, get comfortable, and let's continue our journey through the masterpieces of the Cartier exhibition in Melbourne. Let's step back for a moment into the early years of the 20th century. It was the height of the Belle Époque, an era of strict societal rules, grand receptions, and rigid dress codes. Jewelry at this time was not just a beautiful accessory, it was a definitive statement of your wealth and your standing at court. Take a look at this spectacular diamond lace knot brooch, crafted by Cartier in Paris in 1906. Cartier somehow managed to take cold, hard platinum and diamonds and make them drape and flow as if they were made of the softest, most delicate lace ribbon. But the story of the man who bought it is just as fascinating. This magnificent piece was purchased by Sir Ernest Cassel, a brilliantly successful British financier who was actually the private financial advisor and a very close friend to King Edward VII. He was a man of immense influence at court. Now, you might want to tuck that name away for later, because Sir Ernest was the grandfather of Edwina Mountbatten, and as we will see, his granddaughter ended up treating Cartier's classic designs in a completely unexpected, rule-breaking way. You would think a piece designed for the rigid Edwardian court would stay locked in a vault or only be worn by royalty today. Yet, in 2022, this exact historic brooch made a surprise appearance on the red carpet of the Met Gala. The Belgian singer, Stromae, wore it pinned right at his collar, styling it exactly as it was originally intended to be worn. I just love how a piece of Edwardian court history seamlessly stole the show at a modern fashion event. But speaking of King Edward VII, his royal court was the backdrop for another magnificent Cartier creation from this era. In 1902, just ahead of the king's grand coronation, the Maison completed what is now known as the Essex tiara, and it is a true masterpiece of diamond scrolling. The piece features an astonishing 759 brilliant cut and 289 rose-cut diamonds, weighing in at around 156 carats. Interestingly, the swirling, continuous design was reportedly inspired by a Malaysian headdress. The 7th Earl of Essex purchased this spectacular diadem for his wife, Adele Beach Grant, a wealthy American railway heiress. Adele clearly knew exactly how to present such a magnificent jewel. When she attended the coronation at Westminster Abbey, American newspapers declared her the Belle of the Coronation. They praised her grace and noted her signature hairstyle, which featured one long curl carefully resting on her shoulder. But the glittering perfection of high society can be incredibly fragile. In 1916, Adele's life was tragically turned upside down when her husband was struck by a taxi and killed. The resulting inheritance taxes, the dreaded death duties, were so crippling that she was eventually forced to sell off the family's grand country house and many of its fine art treasures. The strain of losing her husband and her home was simply too much. Adele suffered a heart attack and passed away in the summer of 1922, shortly after the auction was held. Her gorgeous coronation tiara, however, lived on, and its journey is nothing short of remarkable. In 1953, the diadem returned to Westminster Abbey, this time borrowed by Clementine Churchill, the wife of Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill, for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. Decades later, the tiara was purchased at auction and eventually returned home to the Cartier collection. It has remained a beloved showpiece ever since, being loaned to Crown Princess Margareta of Romania for her wedding in 1996, and even gracing the pages of fashion magazines, famously worn by the pop star Rihanna in 2016. It is fascinating how this one tiara managed to effortlessly conquer time, moving from Edwardian peeresses to modern pop stars. While the Essex tiara spent its life gracing grand, joyful celebrations, some royal jewels were destined to become silent witnesses to the turbulent collapse of empires. Let us look at two remarkable pieces that navigated the stormy, unpredictable waters of 20th century history. When Princess Marie Bonaparte married Prince George of Greece and Denmark in 1907, she received several spectacular wedding gifts. Among them was a stunning Cartier pearl and diamond piece, originally crafted as a hair comb and displayed with great pride in the window of the Cartier boutique in Paris. To really appreciate this piece, you have to understand who Marie Bonaparte was. She was not your average royal bride. As the great-grandniece of Emperor Napoleon I and the heiress to the massive Monte Carlo casino fortune, she possessed unimaginable wealth. But she was also a fiercely independent intellectual. She later became a prominent psychoanalyst and was actually the woman who helped Sigmund Freud escape Nazi Germany. What I find most fascinating about this Cartier piece is its rather quiet, understated life with its first owner. A formidable, larger-than-life woman like Princess Marie was never actually photographed wearing this delicate hair comb in public. Isn't it curious? A jewel that remained hidden away by its extraordinary original owner was eventually adapted to be worn as a bandeau, and ultimately became a signature piece for her daughter and granddaughter at some of the most lavish royal weddings of the century. Her daughter, Princess Eugenie, clearly adored the bandeau. She brought it out for the 1937 coronation of King George VI at Westminster Abbey, wore it just ahead of her own wedding in 1938, and chose it again for the spectacular wedding ball of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip in 1947. Later, Eugenie's daughter, Princess Tatiana Radziwill, continued the tradition, wearing the bandeau to the 1962 wedding ball of the future King Juan Carlos of Spain and Princess Sofia of Greece. The piece stayed safely within the family until 1999, when it was sold at auction, finally returning to the Cartier collection. There is something deeply touching about how this delicate jewel quietly linked 3 generations of women across decades of shifting European royalty. Our next piece was born out of survival and later became a literal lifeline in exile. Just look at this magnificent Cartier sautoir featuring a staggering 311.33 carat egg-shaped cabochon sapphire pendant. The story behind it is as dramatic as the sheer size of the stone. The sapphire belonged to Grand Duchess Victoria Melita. If her name doesn't immediately ring a bell, her family background certainly will. She was born a British princess, a granddaughter of Queen Victoria, and her life was a true royal drama. She fell deeply in love with Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich, a cousin to the Russian Tsar, but their romance faced immense opposition. However, destiny intervened in a terrifying way. During the Russo-Japanese War, Kirill was serving on a battleship that was blown up by a mine. He was one of the very few survivors. As he later wrote in his memoirs, "To those over whom the shadow of death has passed, life has a new meaning." That narrow escape completely hardened his determination to marry Victoria, no matter the cost. They married despite the Tsar's absolute refusal, causing such a massive uproar that Kirill was stripped of his royal privileges, and the couple was banished from Russia. But their love survived the exile. Eventually, they were forgiven and allowed to return to St. Petersburg. In 1911, as a Christmas gift to mark exactly 15 years since they first fell in love, Kirill presented her with this breathtaking Cartier sautoir. The massive pendant is suspended from a diamond chain centered with another exquisite 35.13 carat star sapphire. It was a beautiful testament to their resilience, but dark clouds were already gathering over Russia. During the revolution, the family was forced to flee for their lives. To save their most valuable possessions, Victoria Melita's jewels were desperately smuggled out of the country, hidden deep inside the stuffing of her daughter's dolls. Once in their second and final exile, Facing severe financial ruin, the Grand Duchess had to make the painful decision to part with her family treasures. She sold the Cartier sapphire sautoir to her own sister, Queen Marie of Romania, who purchased it for her eldest daughter, Princess Elizabeth. Incredibly, this sapphire's journey as a refugee wasn't over. Decades later, when the Romanian royal family was forced into exile in 1947, Princess Elizabeth managed to smuggle the necklace out of the country yet again. From their vast imperial fortune, only these smuggled stones remained to sustain them after their escapes. The sapphire was saved from the fires of revolution by fleeing across land borders. But our next jewel faced a completely different kind of peril: the icy, unforgiving depths of the ocean. This story breaks my heart every time I recall it, but the phenomenon of this tiara's survival simply defies belief. Our story now takes us to the year 1909, into the incredibly privileged and happy life of the prominent Canadian businessman, Sir Hugh Montague Allen, and his wife Marguerite. Sir Montague, whose family owned the Allen shipping line, wanted to give his wife a truly magnificent gift. He commissioned Cartier to create a stunning diadem. Designed as an open-work Greek keyband, the tiara is set with circular-cut diamonds bordered by delicate seed pearls, all framing a large, detachable, cushion-shaped diamond in the center. Marguerite, who was known as Lady Allen, wore it beautifully to various high society galas and grand drawing rooms. But by 1914, the world had changed irrevocably with the outbreak of the First World War. The Allen family was deeply committed to the war effort. Sir Montague traveled to England to set up a military hospital for wounded Canadian soldiers, and in the spring of 1915, Marguerite decided to join him. She booked first-class passage on the RMS Lusitania, traveling with her two teenage daughters, 16-year-old Anna and 15-year-old Gwen, as well as their two maids, Emily Davis and Annie Walker. Marguerite took almost 20 massive trunks with her, packing everything she would need for a long, extended life across the ocean. The Cartier tiara was tucked away safely in one of them. No one could have even guessed that out of all this impressive luggage, only the tiara would return to the shore. On the afternoon of May 7, 1915, the Lusitania was sailing along the southern coast of Ireland, nearing the end of its voyage. Although the German embassy had actually published warnings in the newspapers before the ship left New York, most people believed the massive, lightning-fast ocean liner was simply untouchable. But suddenly, their false sense of security was shattered when a torpedo from the German U-boat U-20 struck the ship. A second explosion quickly followed, and it became immediately clear that the vessel was going down. What followed were 18 minutes of absolute, terrifying chaos. The ship listed so severely that the crew found it nearly impossible to safely lower the lifeboats. As the deck literally vanished beneath their feet, Marguerite, her daughters, and the maids had no choice but to jump into the freezing water. Marguerite leaped into the ocean, holding tightly to Anna's hand, desperately trying to keep them together. But the powerful suction and the violent vortex of the sinking ship mercilessly tore their hands apart. Marguerite was severely injured in the water, suffering a crushed collarbone. Tragically, both Gwen and Anna were lost to the sea. Yet, in the midst of this unimaginable nightmare, the two maids, Emily and Annie, not only managed to stay near Marguerite, but they also somehow had the Cartier tiara with them. When I look at the cold sparkle of this diamond meander today, my breath catches. It is so difficult to comprehend that this very tiara saw the dark, freezing water of the Irish Sea and heard the cries of the drowning. 2 young girls perished, but the loyal maids, surrounded by absolute chaos, somehow, inconceivably, managed to save the diadem. Marguerite, Emily, and Annie were eventually pulled from the water by a rescue steamer. Lady Allen's physical recovery in an Irish hospital took months, but the emotional scars were permanent. She channeled her profound grief into relentless war relief efforts, working tirelessly for the wounded. Yet, fate was incredibly cruel to her. Just 2 years later, her only son, Hugh, was shot down and killed during his very first service flight in the war. Decades later, she would also lose her eldest daughter, Martha. By the end of her life, Marguerite had outlived all 4 of her children. Through all the decades of heartbreak, Marguerite kept the tiara. She returned to Canada and even wore the diamond meander again in the 1920s. It remained safely within the family for a century, passing down to her descendants, until it was finally auctioned in 2015 and acquired for the Cartier collection. This diadem carries an unimaginably heavy burden of memory. It stands as a bittersweet survivor of a family that lost almost everything. But jewelry history knows other examples where stones became a symbol not of grief, but of incredible, unapologetic female independence. As the 1920s and 1930s rolled in, the atmosphere in the world of high jewelry began to shift dramatically. We leave behind the era where aristocratic women simply smiled and politely accepted whatever classic diadems their husbands graciously purchased for them. A new, fiercely independent type of client was stepping through the doors of the Cartier boutiques. These women were wealthy, unapologetic, and they knew exactly how they wanted to present themselves to the world. A perfect example of this new wave of female empowerment is Beatrice, the Countess of Granard. Born Beatrice Mills, she was an immensely wealthy American heiress who married the 8th Earl of Granard. She was so financially independent that she actually provided the funds to restore her husband's historic family seat, Castle Forbes in Ireland. And when it came to her jewelry box, Beatrice was very much the one calling the shots. In January 1932, Cartier's London workshop completed a truly awe-inspiring piece for her. It is a flexible platinum collar featuring a graduated Persian-style fringe, and sitting proudly at the very center is a gigantic rectangular emerald weighing an astonishing 143.13 carats. The design is an absolute triumph of Art Deco aesthetics, featuring open-back settings and crisp, clean lines. But the most fascinating detail about this masterpiece isn't just its bold geometry. It is the fact that Cartier did not source these stones. Beatrice did. She personally supplied the Maison with the massive 143-carat emerald. She also handed over 4 batten diamonds to flank the center stone, 14 square diamonds for the geometric fringe motifs, and no fewer than 2,011 brilliant cut diamonds. I find this level of agency so refreshing. Instead of buying a ready-made piece from the display case, she utilized Cartier's masterful craftsmen to execute her own grand vision. She curated her own collection of gems and commissioned the exact statement piece she wanted to wear. The necklace later became a cherished family heirloom, prominently worn by her daughter, Lady Eileen. Do you remember Sir Ernest Cassel, the influential royal banker who purchased that delicate diamond lace knot brooch back in 1906? Well, I told you we would cross paths with his family again, and the time has come to meet his granddaughter. Her name was Edwina Ashley, though you might know her better as Edwina, the Countess Mountbatten of Burma. Edwina was one of the wealthiest women in England, a vibrant socialite, and eventually the last viceroy of India. When it came to her jewelry, she completely abandoned the rigid, monochrome diamond aesthetic of her grandfather's generation. Instead, she embraced the most joyful, radical, and colorful jewelry trend of the era, Cartier's tutti frutti style. Following Jacques Cartier's extensive travels to India, the Maison began incorporating carved Indian gemstones, emeralds, rubies, and sapphires, into their Western designs. The result was a spectacular riot of color that was completely unprecedented in European high jewelry. In November 1928, Edwina purchased an exquisite Art Deco tutti frutti bandeau from Cartier for £900. I absolutely adore the design of this piece. It is crafted in the form of a sinuous, creeping vine. The main stem is entirely paved with diamonds, while the leaves and blossoming fruits are formed by those magnificent carved colored gemstones set in platinum. It is such a vibrant, tactile piece of art. There is also a wonderful piece of social history attached to this diadem. It was actually created by English Artworks, a London-based workshop set up by Cartier specifically to employ British craftsmen during the severe economic depression of the 1920s. Furthermore, in true versatile Cartier fashion, the bandeau was designed to break apart into 2 separate bracelets. Edwina clearly loved this feature, famously wearing the jewel as a pair of bracelets in a beautiful portrait taken with her newborn daughter, Pamela. The piece is widely considered one of the finest surviving London-made multi-gem jewels of the period. In fact, in 2004, the British government actually placed a temporary export ban on this very bandeau, simply because it had become so incredibly valuable to the history of British jewelry design. But if Edwina Mountbatten was a woman who flawlessly followed the height of fashion, our next heroine was the one fiercely creating it, and she did so quite unapologetically. Our next heroine, Daisy Fellows, didn't just follow trends, she dictated them. As the heiress to the singer's sewing machine fortune and a Paris fashion editor, she was a celebrated and slightly feared style icon. In Cartier, she found the perfect partner for her rebellious taste. In 1936, she commissioned the Maison to create the legendary Collier Hindu. She actually supplied Cartier with her own collection of carved emeralds, rubies, sapphires, and diamonds to make it. The shape was directly inspired by a magnificent ceremonial bib necklace created just a year earlier for the Maharaja of Patna. But while the original Indian jewel featured only diamonds, carved emeralds, and rubies, Daisy transformed that prototype into her own Art Deco masterpiece. The result was a dazzling knot of twisted diamond vines, studded with emerald leaves and ruby and sapphire berries. And this is where she made a bold departure from her Eastern inspiration. In traditional Indian jewelry, sapphires were often avoided as unlucky stones, which is why the Maharaja's necklace didn't include them at all. Daisy, however, completely ignored these conventions. She embraced them in absolute excess, adding borders of sapphire beads and a dramatic fringe of 13 faceted sapphires right at the front. In a nod to its origins, the necklace was originally fastened with a simple black Indian silk cord, allowing Daisy to adjust the length. It wasn't until decades later, in 1963, that her daughter had Cartier replace those silk strings with a permanent jeweled clasp made from the necklace's own stones. Whenever I looked at photographs of this next piece, I always pictured it strictly as a traditional headpiece. Unlike many standard convertible Cartier tiaras that you can easily mentally detach from their frames and imagine resting gracefully around the neck, this one just doesn't look like a necklace at all. It is the Cartier Tree of Life tiara, crafted in Paris in 1914, and its design is absolutely captivating. It is shaped like a traditional Russian kokoshnik, completely paved with diamonds. But what makes it so incredibly unusual is the stylized tree made of black enamel and onyx. Its dark branches sprawl beautifully across the dense diamond background, with the whole piece crowned by a row of natural pearls along the upper edge. Black onyx is actually quite a rare sight in royal tiaras, as it was historically a staple of mourning jewelry. But here, combined with the brilliant diamonds, the flowing black branches give the tiara a slightly mystical, almost fairy tale quality. It is a stunning example of early Art Deco design, and you can imagine my genuine surprise when I found out who owned this tiara, and more importantly, how she chose to wear it. The diadem belonged to Baroness Marie-Hélène de Rothschild, a prominent French socialite and a true doyenne of Parisian high society. She was known for her incredible imagination, her flair for the surreal, and her highly original approach to fashion. She clearly saw a potential in this 1914 masterpiece that most of us would completely miss. Instead of always wearing it traditionally nestled in her coiffed hair for grand soirees, she decided to repurpose it in the most unexpected way. In 1973, when she attended a review premiere accompanied by Salvador Dalí, she wore this rigid kokoshnik fastened tightly around her neck as a choker. She repeated this striking look a year later at a party hosted by Yves Saint Laurent for Andy Warhol in Paris, pairing the tiara-turned collar with a large Art Deco diamond brooch. I absolutely love this kind of boldness. To take a rigid, structured headpiece from 1914 and wear it as an avant-garde collar requires a very special kind of style and confidence. It was a brilliant, creative reinterpretation of a historic jewel. You might think that repurposing a stiff kokoshnik as a choker is as eccentric as a client can possibly get when it comes to fine jewelry. But just wait until you hear the story of a woman who casually walked into the Cartier boutique in Paris carrying a live predator. Our journey through the world of high jewelry wouldn't be complete without a grand finale of female extravagance. Our next heroine took her passion for the exotic to a completely unprecedented level. I am talking about the legendary Mexican actress and singer, Maria Felix. Maria had an absolute obsession with reptiles, and in 1968, she commissioned Cartier to create what would become one of the most technically complex pieces of the 20th century, a spectacular diamond snake necklace. Crafted in platinum and set with a staggering 178.21 carats of white diamonds, the 60-centimeter serpent was designed to coil gracefully around the neck with lifelike fluidity. Every single scale is individually articulated. It was a true engineering triumph that took the master craftsman over 2 years to perfect. The serpent features gleaming emerald eyes, and according to legend, Maria loved its incredible flexibility so much that she would sometimes twirl it around her head like a lasso. The underside of the serpent's belly is beautifully enameled in green, white, and red, the colors of the Mexican flag. It was a very private, permanent homage to her beloved home country. Her love for dangerous, hyper-realistic motifs didn't stop with the diamond serpent. In 1975, La Doña, as she was famously known, made a truly legendary entrance at the Cartier boutique on the Rue de la Paix in Paris. There are different versions of this famous tale. Some say she brought a baby crocodile safely in an aquarium or a glass jar, while others claim she simply marched into the elegant boutique holding the live reptile right in her hands. Honestly, no matter which version is exactly true, the very idea of bringing a live crocodile to a high-end Parisian jeweler completely baffles me. It takes an unimaginable level of eccentricity. She presented the little predator to the shocked staff and demanded that they replicate its exact physiognomy in a necklace, urging them to work quickly before the crocodile grew any larger. Cartier's genius was seriously challenged, but having a live model clearly paid off. They absolutely delivered, and the resulting crocodiles turned out exceptionally, almost dangerously realistic. The dynamic necklace features 2 intertwined, fully articulated crocodiles designed to hug the neck. One is covered in 1,023 fancy, intense yellow diamonds and features cabochon emerald eyes. Its twin is set with 1,060 vibrant emeralds, piercing the viewer with ruby eyes. They are so meticulously engineered that the inner legs can be replaced with special motifs, simulating folded legs for more comfortable wear, and both reptiles can be detached to serve as separate 3-dimensional brooches. Felix reportedly even used them as captivating table ornaments to decorate during her dinner parties. It took the Cartier artisans a staggering 1,875 hours of meticulous work to construct these beasts. When you look at the incredibly lifelike curve of their snouts, the texture of the scales, and the exact anatomical details, you realize this is no longer just a necklace. It is a full-fledged, wearable sculpture that perfectly captures the untamed, charismatic, and fiercely independent spirit of the woman who commissioned it. Seeing these exotic creatures resting under the museum lights today is a truly mesmerizing experience, as they absolutely command the room. As we look at these treasures behind the glass today, it becomes so clear that we are looking at much more than just perfect platinum settings or rare carats. We are reading the fascinating chronicles of the women who owned them. From those who gracefully carried the heavy burden of royal tradition, to those who miraculously survived the freezing ocean waters, and finally, to those who completely defied convention, wearing historic tiaras on their necks and bringing live reptiles to the Place Vendôme. It is these deeply human stories, with all their tragedy, triumph, and sheer audacity, that truly breathe life into these masterpieces. By the way, if you are in Australia or planning a trip soon, this incredible Cartier exhibition is currently open in Melbourne, so you can actually go and see these exact jewels with your own eyes. I am so curious. Have any of you already managed to visit it? Or perhaps you are planning to go? Or maybe you've had the chance to see a Cartier exhibition in another city. I would absolutely love to hear about it. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I always genuinely enjoy reading your real, live impressions and seeing these pieces through your eyes. If you loved diving into these stories with me today, I would be so grateful if you left a like and subscribe to the channel. It is the best way to support my work and make sure you don't miss our next journey into the royal vaults. Thank you so much for watching and for your wonderful company today. Because in the end, jewels may be silent, but their stories are not. And they won't be as long as we keep telling them.